Hey guys, it's Jesse from Old Pine Island Marina. Today we're going to be working on an Avet LX 6.0 to 1. This is a customer's reel. It's got a little bit of a tight feeling issue and drag pressure start getting up a little bit higher. So I imagine this is just going to be a simple ball bearing replacement and re-grease of the reel. So what we're going to do to start off with is take the preset knob off. We can set it to the side. Take the drag lever off and set it to the side. And get a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver, and we're going to take these 3 screws out right here. That whole side plate's going to come right off. This pinion bearing right here sometimes will stay locked onto the main to the drag plate, so it doesn't matter where it goes just as long as you know where it's supposed to be. Drop the drag plate off there and pull the spool out just to keep the line kind of put away and clean. I'm going to wrap it back on here a little tighter and stick a rubber band on that. Be careful if you're getting grease or anything on your hands. If you're working on other ones before this, try to keep the grease and stuff off your line. Rubber band's no good. Let's see here. There we go. So, we're going to set the frame aside. There's nothing really in there. Clean some grease out of the bottom of that in a few minutes. We can also take the drag plate and the pawl spur and set that aside too, or whatever the star is called for the pawls to bite onto. We can take these 3 screws and throw them over here too. Now for the main shaft, you're going to have 2 sets of ball bearings on here on this side. You'll have a little ball bearing, which is that guy, and you will have a shim, a spring, another shim, but this one's stuck to the ball bearing. There's the shim, and there's the ball bearing. So it'll go bearing, shim, spring, shim, bearing. Take the main shaft out. Also on the main shaft there's a spacer tube. He sits inside the spool. Take the main shaft off. This ball bearing stayed inside here today. This left side ball bearing is a real common one to go out. So typically if something's going on with the reel, that's one of the ball bearings that'll be going out. So on this you'll have this little spacer collar, and then you'll have these little bevel washers. These are actually not put together properly. These guys have to go in a specific order in order for your drag ratings to be right from the factory. So those first 4 were right, and these last 2 were wrong. There. I'll show you a little picture of what those are supposed to look like here in a second. Basically, the way they're supposed to go on here is in that order right there. You'll have 2 cupped washers facing this way, 2 cupped washers facing that way, and a cup this way and a cup that way. So when you pull them tight, they'll look like that. So we can set him aside for a moment. Actually, just stick this back on here. Now we can set it aside for a minute. And we're going to pop this little ball bearing out right here. So we're going to come in from the other side and pop them out. And we're going to get the new one that I set right here. This is the old one, so he goes back in the bag. The new one. These come greased from the factory already, so there's nothing you really got to do to them. Sometimes you can grease inside that cup to make them go in there a little bit better, which we're going to do. We're going to actually put the main shaft right back in now. And push that into the seats. There we go. A lot of times they're not even that tight. That one just seems to be kind of a pain today. So with these bearings right here, you're going to have two different types of ball bearings. You're going to have a sealed one on both sides, which is that guy. And he's got seals on both sides. And then you'll have one that's sealed on one side, right there, and open on the other side. So the one who's open is going to get put face down first into the spool. Stick some oil on that, send him down. We're going to put a shim on, and we're going to put the spring on the other shim. Oh, I forgot a part in there. Before you do all that, put the spacer tube back on. And then you put the ball bearing, shim, spring, then shim, then ball bearing. Now the spool is just about ready to go. Clean that off. Put a little bit of grease on the main drag washer. Avet recommends running these drag washers dry. The majority of people that I know actually pull the brand new reels apart, and the first thing they do is grease the main washer. That's going to be up to you as to whether or not you want to grease it. Personally, I like greasing them because it seems to keep the salt water out, and I've never really noticed anything negative about greasing them. So that's going to be a preference thing, really. So we can set him aside now up here. We're going to come over here to the other side. We're going to have to take this little guy out, the pinion gear out, and just set him aside. Flip that up. Number 1 Phillips screwdriver. Take out these 2 keeper screws. That one. Oops. And that one. Take off the little keeper plate. Get a little wrench. Loosen this acorn nut. We'll just loosen it for now. We're going to come to the inside over here. We're going to take these little screws out that hold this pawl in place. So that's just going to be the same number 1 Phillips. We'll break them loose. Take them out. These screws are going to be flatheads, where the ones on the keeper are pan heads. So just don't confuse those two. They're about the same size and about the same length. So just as long as you remember that the ones on the keeper are pan heads and the ones on the pawl are flatheads. So you can come in here, take the little plate off that holds the pawl in, pick up the pawl, pull him out. The easiest way I found to take these little S wires out, not really a wire, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little S piece right here. The easiest way I found to take them out and to put them in is to just rotate the handle until it comes free of the wire right here, and then just pick him up and off of the wire that keeps him on. You don't have to mess with taking that spring wire off and all that other stuff to do that way. So now we can finish taking this nut off. Set him to the side. I'll have a washer on the outside of the handle right there. This washer goes on this side of the handle. This washer here has got a lip on it right there. This side right here faces ball bearing. This side faces the handle. So don't forget that when you go to put it back together. Now the main shaft is free to come out. There's a ball bearing here, and a spacer tube in between them. Just make sure you get the ball bearings back in place, obviously. So these main gears are really well built in my opinion. So that's one of the reasons I like these reels so much. I'm going to set him aside. I'm going to set all the rest of this to the side here. Put over here. These two guys over here. You over there. This that we're going after now is going to be the pinion bearing. This is actually more frequently the ball bearing that goes out. Whenever I replace the left side bearing, I typically replace the pinion bearing at the same time, just so when I work on the reel next time, I know that I basically replace them all in sets, so I know how old they are, because they're all the same age. So we're going to clean some of this grease out. Sometimes you'll have these bearings that are really hard to get out, and some of them will just fall right out. So we'll see which one this one's going to be today. The last three I did weren't too thrilled about leaving. So we're going to see what this one does here in a second. Alright, this is a little ball bearing sort of puller thing that I made. All it is an old little tiny flathead screwdriver that I bent over to make a little hook out of it. So we're going to see if this will come out this way. I'm just trying to reach down there and catch that lip and see if we can pull it out, which we can't. So what we're going to do is, this ball bearing stayed in place on this side, so we're going to tap him out, set him to the side. Now we're going to take these lever drag stops off, because we're going to have to heat up that little bearing housing right there in order to get that ball bearing out. That's why we're wiping a lot of that grease off. That's for when we have to heat this up. So you're going to want to have a little rag ready, and that way we can pick it up. Make sure you have like a wood desk or something. Don't do this on glass, obviously. This is just a little butane torch. Basically what we're going to want to heat up is the area right here all the way around, because we're wanting to expand the aluminum away from the ball bearing right there. So you're going to want to heat it up relatively fast in order to stop the ball bearing from also getting the heat and starting to expand with it and then getting even more stuck. So these reels are all anodized, so I've never had issues with any burn marks or anything like that. Just don't go crazy on it, leaving the torch sitting there for a long time. Just kind of constantly move the thing around for a few seconds until you feel like it's kind of probably getting hot, which is probably getting close to getting warm anyway right now. We're just going to pick it up and tap it against the desk pretty hard in order to see if we can get the ball bearing to fall out. And there it goes. So what you're basically doing is expanding this cup right here in order to give that ball bearing some tolerance in order to fall out. So don't forget this stuff is going to be hot, because you just... Okay, now this has had a couple minutes to cool off. It doesn't really take long because it's aluminum. We're just going to come in here and stick some bearing or some grease inside this bearing cup right here. You're going to get our new ball bearing and then slide them right in. Still a tiny bit warm, so the bearing actually went in there real well, easily anyway. Here's the old bearing, and stick him in the garbage. Now we start putting it back together. We're going to have to get the main spool. Main gear. I like to put a real thin coat of grease on the back side of these. I've seen these get rusty before. I don't know what kind of steel they're made out of, but I've never seen one stripped out, so I imagine it's a relatively hard steel. But it does have a tendency to rust. So we're just going to stick a thin coat of grease on that just to keep that all happy and protected. We got the bearing and the spacer sleeve on that side, so we're just going to drop that in there. Get the other ball bearing, stick it on the other side. Then our little washer here, the little flange lip side thing down, handle, acorn nut, and just torque that guy down some. You don't have to go crazy on this. It's not really holding a ton of pressure, really. A little keeper. And we're going to get the pan head screws, which I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not, but that is a pan head, where that is a flathead, because it's countersunk. So we're going to take the pan head screws here, stick a tiny bit of grease on the tip of the screwdriver just so we can hold the screw. Kind of makes the screw stick to the screwdriver, which makes life easier. Drop it in there and thread it in. We're going to get the other one and do the same thing. Alright, we can also put these guys back in. These threads, I like to grease them a little bit because they tend to get a lot of salt and corrosion on them. On the stops for the lever. Get that off some. Turn that around that way. Just gonna put that in there. Torque that down. Don't go crazy tightening stuff. These are all stainless screws going into aluminum, so you don't want to strip anything out. And careful you don't cross thread anything either. If it doesn't feel like it's going right, then back it off and start again. Alrighty, so flip it back over. I'm gonna stick a little bit of grease on this face of the gear. These are just the gear faces. It's not actually gonna have any contact on these parts right here. So this is literally just to stop any rust from being able to form on the face of the gears, which I've seen before. So I'm gonna come in here where the pawl sits and we're gonna grease that up real good. This little pawl is gonna face down. So before we get him back in here, I'm going to take his little wire, because these don't use springs, which is why they're quiet when you crank them. We're going to put this back on the same way we took it off. So let's see here, it's got to sit like that. So we're going to hold it. We're going to slide it onto the little vertical peg right here. Crank it that way. Spin it backwards while we push down on that, and it'll slide underneath that other little leg that's sitting right here, and it'll be in place like that with this little pawl. You want to make sure you get the pawl facing the right direction. The little tooth part has to face down the angle, alongside of the angle does. So here's the pawl right here. Set him in there. Make sure you set him on top of the wire there. Kind of hard to do. There we go. There we go. Basically, it's cut at an angle, and you want to make sure that the long part of the tooth is facing down towards the gear. Otherwise, it'll go back together and it'll feel fine until you put pressure on it, and then it'll actually let it slip and the anti-reverse won't grab because the tooth is facing the wrong way. So now we're going to take our little flatheads after we put the little plate on there. Thread the little flathead screws right in there. Tighten them down. Again, don't go crazy on these either. These are really small screws. So that's all good to go now. We get our pinion gear, slide them back in there. Put a little bit of grease on the teeth of the pinion. That'll spread it out. And basically we're going to put the drag washer back onto the spool. So we already greased we're going to put the drag plate back onto the spool. We already greased the drag washer lightly. And we're going to put this guy back on here. Well, this again is just to stop any corrosion from happening on the face of these, because I've seen these get rusty too. So we're going to drop him on there. Make sure that bearing seat's in there. We're going to take our main body of the spool and clean out this little bottom spot down here. Put a drop of oil on the clicker. And make sure that works right. You got a little, sorry about that. Got a T-shape right here. It's got to lock into the T-shape down there. That little crossbar anyway. So that goes in and locks in. I got the drag washer and everything else is in there. Slide. The main pinion I put on that side, it seems to make life easier. We're just going to slide those two together. Lock them together. Oh. Not locking up right. There we go. You're going to be putting it together under a little bit of spring tension, so you have to kind of hold it for a second there. We're just going to run these screws back in here. You should be able to get both sides of the reel touching just by using your hands. So you'll see there's a little gap, and then you squeeze it and the gap goes away. If the gap doesn't go away when you squeeze it, turn the handle a little bit. It means that the pinion gear didn't lock into the drag washer or the drag plate, and you just gotta rotate it around till it locks in. Tighten those down. Don't strip them out. And then we're going to take our drag lever, stick it down here. The preset knob. And you're good to go.